A pleasant afternoon to everyone. I am Ryan Lawrence Bernard F. Bautista together with Mr. Micah Israel A. Rojas, and we're here to discuss about the pre-colonial past of the Filipinos. We have the social stratification of ancient Filipinos. We have also the Philippine archipelago of the ancient Filipinos, the influence of Spaniards on ancient Filipinos, and the norms and costumes of courtship and marriage in the life of ancient Filipinos. So as we begin, I'll be your first reporter. I'm Ryan again, and this is the social stratification of ancient Filipinos. The political development of the archipelago was such that there was no national or central government yet. In other words, there was no datu strong enough to consolidate considerable power and to unite the archipelago into one nation. So before the advent of Spanish colonization, the barangay was the primary political, economic, and social cultural institution in the Philippines. Barangay is originated from balangay, a Malay word for sailboat. The barangay was first used by the group of Austronesian peoples when they migrated to the Philippines many years ago. So a barangay can be composed of about 30 to 100 families. Every barangay is autonomous and is ruled by either datu, raha, or lakan. So a barangay can also form alliance with other barangays to become powerful and prosperous. This can be achieved through marriage or blood compact. And we have also the derivation of legitimacy of barangays. The system of government, although defensive or defective, was not so bad considering the conditions in other lands in the age during which it flourished. So here we have the circulation of prestige goods like giving relief goods or the materials and goods that they need in order to survive or live. We have also the contracted marriage. This is between a tribe or in a barangay in wherein while you were a child, you were agree formally to get married to someone, and that's called contracted marriage. For example, that when you are 5 years old, you have a marriage contract to marry someone when you get the age limit of being married. We have also the sponsorship of feasts to negotiate social status relations. This can be done through feasts or festivals like fiestas in order to consolidate with other families about your social status relations, something like that. We have the Philippine archipelago of the ancient Filipinos. The Philippine archipelago was settled at least 30,000 years ago, when migrations from the Indonesian archipelago and elsewhere are believed to have occurred. Additional migrations took place over the next millennia. Over time, social and political organization developed and evolved in the widely scattered islands. The basic unit of settlement was the barangay. As I've said, it is a Malay word for boat or balangay. It's a kind of boat that came to be used to denote a communal settlement. Kinship groups were led by a datu, which is other words for chief, and within the barangay there were broad social divisions consisting of nobles, freemen, and dependent and landless agricultural workers and slaves. So in every barangay, we have the chief, datu, and the maharlika, the timawa, and the slaves, and we will proceed to that later on. Over the centuries, Indo-Malay migrants were joined by Chinese traders. A major development in the early period was the introduction of Islam to the Philippines by traders and proselytizers from the Indonesian islands. By ad hominem 1500s, Islam had been established in the Sulu archipelago and spread there from to Mindanao. It reached the Manila area by 1565. So after 65 years, the Sulu archipelago established and reached to the Manila area. So in the midst of the introduction of Islam came the introduction of Christianity with the arrival of the Spanish, which is Cristianismo. The Philippine archipelago is divided into 3 island groups. We have the Luzon, the Visayas, and the Mindanao. The Luzon islands include Luzon itself, Palawan, Mindoro, Marinduque, Masbate, Coromblon, Catanduanes, Batanes, and Polillo. The Visayas is the group of islands in the central Philippines, the largest of which are Panay, Negros, Cebu, Bohol, Leyte, Samar, Siquijor, Biliran, and Guimaras, or the island of Guimaras. The Mindanao Islands includes Mindanao itself. We have the Dinagat, the Siargao, the Camiguin Islands, Samal, plus the Sulu Archipelago. We have the social stratification of ancient Filipinos. The social classes that comprises a barangay, the ruling class, which is the Lakan or Tumao, which had started to accumulate land that it owned privately or administered in the name of the clan or community. The chieftain of the whole barangay and is the wealthiest person in the community. So in every barangay, there is a leader which is called the chieftain or the datu. And to become a datu, one must possess bravery, intelligence, and wealth, which is a huge amount, which a datu, in order to become a datu, one must possess a huge amount of gold, land, and a huge number of slaves. We have also the Maharlika / Timawa. These two are very different from each other because Maharlikas are the datus aid for keeping the barangays organized, or as we call the datu soldiers. Intermediate class of men who had enough land, those who rendered services to the rulers and do not work on fields. They are the commoners. They can own their own land and don't have to pay regular tribute. So the Maharlika is the datu soldiers. They serve the datu and they fight to keep the datu his position. While the Timawa is called the free men who can own their own land and don't have to pay regular tribute or taxes. Taxes is already exists in the pre-colonial era of the Philippines. We have the Alipin or Oripon, in other words. Those who are, one can become an Alipin when they are unable to pay their debts, punish criminals, and illegitimate children. Slavery is a system where humans are treated as property by forcing them to do work for their masters no matter if this will cost their life. So during pre-colonial period, slavery is very common as a punishment system to the criminals or people that did something wrong. There are two types of slaves, which is the namamahay and the sagigilid. The namamahay, those who had their own quarters but live to serve their masters. We have also the sagigilid, those who live in their master's house. They are the real slaves. They were homeless. And namamahay is those who are living with the master. And the sagigilid has no property, and namamahay has property, and could not marry without master's consent. They could be used as a payment for them. So the class of the person may change because it is not permanent. If, for example, if a free man commits a crime, then she will become a slave for a certain period of time and can reclaim his or her status. They can also marry people from different classes, or what we call intermarriage, though it's very rare in free man to slave marriage, but possible. And during pre-colonial times, women shared equal footing with men in society. They were allowed to divorce, own, and inherit property, and even lead their respective barangays or territories. In matters of family, the women were for all intents and purposes the working heads, possessing the power of the purse and the sole right to name their children. They could also dictate the terms of their marriage and even retain their maiden names if they chose to do so. During this time, people also traced their heritage to both their father and mother. In fact, it could be said that pre-colonial Philippines was largely matriarchal, with the opinions of women holding great weight in matters of politics and religion. Or they also headed the rituals as the babaylans, which is the babaylans are the women during the pre-colonial period. Women has more rights during that and has more power than men. Life in pre-colonial Philippines was governed by a set of statutes, both unwritten and written, and contained provisions with regards to civil and criminal laws. Usually it was the dato and the village elders who promulgated such laws, which were then announced and explained to the people by a town crier called the Umalohokan. So women in pre-colonial Philippines played a critical role in the community both in political and religion matters. Unlike churches now led by men, we now have, it was the women who led rituals before. They were called babaylan. So it said the babaylan is where the datus asked for political advice from them, especially during wars. They were to believe to possess the ability to perceive the chances for their datu winning the fight. So babaylan can see the future or can see the results of any possible outcome or in any war or in any problem. The babaylan can also enjoy freedom and rights that were denied to the women during Spanish colonization, such as rights to own private property, sell their own goods, to become the next datu if no son is available, freedom to choose their husbands and divorce if they preferred. Virginity is not a requirement for a girl to be respected. Even an effeminate male has been determined to have a potential in becoming a babaylan and to marry another man. So it's nice to hear that LGBTQ was more accepted during pre-colonial time because men can be a babaylan and the babaylan is for women. So a transgendered man can be a babaylan. So in the pre-colonial past of the Philippines is described to be a nation of strong women who directly and indirectly ran the family unit, businesses, government agencies, and haciendas. Although they generally define themselves in the milieu of a masculine-dominated post-colonial Asian Catholic society, Filipino women live in a culture that is focused on the community, with the family as the main unit of society. It is in this framework of Philippine hierarchical structure, class differences, religious justifications, and living in a globally developing nation wherein Filipino women struggle for respect. So it is normal to the Philippines that in every criticism, women struggle for respect or human rights. Some pre-colonial social structures of the Philippines have equal importance to maternal and paternal lineage. This bilateral kinship system accorded Philippine women enormous power within a clan. They were entitled to property, engaged in a trade, and could exercise the right to divorce her husband. They could also become village chiefs in the absence of a male heir. Before the arrival of the Spaniards, Filipino women could also achieve status as medicine women or high priestesses and astrologers. Now let's go to the influence of Spaniards on ancient Filipino. Spanish settlement in the Philippines first took place in the 1500s. So during that time, the Spanish colonial period of the island, the conquistador Miguel Lopez de Legazpi founded the first Spanish settlement in Cebu in 1565 and later established Manila as the capital of the Spanish East Indies in 1571. So until now, the capital of the Philippines is located at Metro Manila. The Philippine Islands are named after King Philip. Spaniards are referred to by Filipinos as Castilla or Castilian in English, named after the former kingdom of Castile, now a region of Spain. The majority of the Filipinos of Spanish descent are of Spaniard origin, while a very small minority are Latin American descent, which is another term for Spanish Filipino. Here are some of the influences of Spaniards. Spaniards introduced as language the Philippine Spanish or Espanol Filipino or Castellano Filipino. It's a variant of standard Spanish spoken in the Philippines. It is a Spanish dialect of the Spanish language. And they also brought us the name of the Philippines, which came from King of Spain, Philip II. It was given by the Spanish explorer Ruy Lopez de Villalobos, who named the islands of Samar and Leyte, named Las Islas Filipinas, or in English, the Philippine Islands, during his expedition in 1543, or yung paglalakbay niya, or pag-discover or explore dito sa Pilipinas, which he after his name. Throughout the colonial period, the name Filipinas or Philippines was used and became the official name of the Philippines, which is the Republic of the Philippines. So Spanish and American colonization, as well as interactions through trade with other neighboring countries, has brought a kaleidoscope of cultures to the Philippines. This unique combination of foreign influences produced a complex but beautiful local culture that somehow turned out to be distinctively Filipino. Religion is probably the biggest imprint left by the Spaniards, who converted most of the population to Christianity. Like until now, like going to churches, they are the ones who introduced us Cristianismo. While the Americans boosted the Philippine educational system and made English as the second language of the country. So we have our pambansang salita, which is the Tagalog or Filipino. And because of the American colonization, they made English as the second language here in the Philippines, which is used nowadays and until now. We have also another influence of Spaniards on ancient Filipinos. Filipino-Spanish surnames. A Spanish or Latin-sounding surname does not necessarily denote Spanish ancestry in the Philippines. The names derive from the Spanish conquest of the Philippine Islands and its implementation of a Spanish naming system. After the Spanish conquest of the Philippine Islands, many early Christianized Filipinos assumed religious instrument or saint names. This resulted in many people's surname like De Los Santos, which means of the saints, and De La Cruz, which means of the cross, and Del Rosario, which means of the rosary, and Bautista, my surname, can be called Baptist, and other more. Like, I example Baptist of Saint John the Baptist or San Juan Bautista. Religion. Filipinos at home set up altars in the Hispanic tradition, adorned with Catholic images, flowers, and candles. During fiestas, most communities organize church services and religious processions in honor of a patron saint, hold fun fairs and concerts, and feast with a variety of Filipino foods. In other words, fiestas or celebrations. Festivities. All major Christian holidays are observed as official national holidays in the Philippines. Spanish culture and Christianity has influenced the customs and traditions of the Philippines. Every year on the third Sunday of January, the Philippines celebrates the festival of the Santo Niño, or the Holy Child Jesus, the largest being held in Cebu City. We have also holidays like during pre-colonial period, or the Spaniards, they already introduced us or celebrated holidays like New Year's Day during January 1, and Easter, which means in Good Friday, which then celebrated during March or April. We have also the arts, literature, and music. Hispanic influence is based on indigenous and European tradition. Folk dance, music, and literature have remained intact in the 21st century. These were introduced from Spain in the 16th century and can be regarded as largely Hispanic in constitution, which have remained in the Philippines for centuries, or cuisine. So when we say cuisine, it speaks about regional food preparation traditions and ingredients, often combined to create dishes unique to a particular region. For example, Region 1, what is their food there? Like in every region or in every place, or in any place here in the Philippines, there is a kumbaga kung kahit saan ka magpunta, bawat lugar may kilala kang pagkain. Pag sabing pagkain na yun, alam mo agad kung saan lugar yun nag-originate. Moving on, we have the norms and costumes of courtship and marriage in the life of ancient Filipinos. Traditional marriage customs in the Philippines and Filipino wedding practices pertain to the characteristics of marriage and wedding traditions established and where Filipino communities exist. Kasalan is the Filipino word for wedding. While its root word kasal means marriage, the present-day character of marriages and weddings in the Philippines were primarily influenced by the permutation of native, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, Spanish, and American models. A typical ancient traditional Filipino wedding during pre-colonial times is held for 3 days and was officiated by a babaylan, or as I've said or as I've explained, a babaylan is a tribal priest or priestess, either boy or a girl during pre-colonial period. While nowadays, our church is headed by a boy, by a priest. The house of the baybay, the house of the babaylan was the ceremonial center for the nuptials. So ikakasal sila dun sa bahay ng babaylan. On the first day, the couple was brought to the priest's home where the babaylan blesses them, while their hands are joined over a container of uncooked rice. So their hands are hold together and over the top of the uncooked rice or the bigas or grain. On the third day, the priest would prick their chest to draw a small amount of blood, which will be placed on a container to be mixed with water. After announcing their love for each other for 3 times, they were fed by the priest with cooked rice coming from a single container. So afterwards, they were to drink the water that was mixed with their blood. The priest proclaimed that they are officially wed, and after their necks and hands were bound by a cord, or sometimes, once their long hairs had been entwined together, in lieu of the babaylan, the datu or a wise elder may also officiate a pre-colonial Filipino wedding. So after the ceremony, a series of gift exchanging rituals was also done to counter the negative response of the bride. If asked to enter her new home, or if she refuses to go up the stairs of the dwelling, if she denies to participate in the marriage banquet or banquet, or even to go into her new bedroom, a room she would be sharing with her spouse or with her loved ones, or with her husband or wife. Mixed marriages are exist during pre-colonial era. So when you say mixed marriages, or marriage between a man and a woman from different social class, such as a free man with a slave, were rare. So as I said, different classes so ang mga iba't ibang klase ng mga tao sa during pre-colonial pwedeng pakasal sa kahit anong classes nila, na either datu to the slave, or no, not like that, like the freeman to the slave, or the maharlika to the timawa, like that. So if it happened, the children of the couple were equally divided among the parents in terms of social status. For example, a marriage between a father who was a free man to a mother who was a slave would result in the following division: the eldest, the third, the fifth, and so on. Whether male or female went to the mother. All the children belonging thus became free men, and those belonging to the mother became slave. If there was only one child, he became half free and half slave. So, equality, social equality. Among the ancient Filipinos, Pinoy, the legitimate children or the children of a man by his first wife automatically inherited the property of their parents even without a written agreement to that effect. The property was equally divided among the children, although either parent could exercise some partiality in giving a favorite son or daughter an extra jewel or a few pieces of gold. So we have also favoritism during that era. So, Mr. Mike Roas, I give this to you. You're the next.
Now, let's proceed on to the clothing and dress code of ancient Filipinos. Well, in the early days, Filipinos, ancient Filipinos have very different culture. Filipinos in ancient times were very particular about their manner of dressing. Their clothes were made of cotton, silk, and plant fibers. The men's clothing consisted of a collarless, short-sleeved jacket called kangan and a strip of cloth wrapped around the waist and between the legs called bahag. Women's clothing consisted of a blouse with big sleeves called baro and a loose skirt called saya or patajong. A piece or a tapis or a piece of colored cloth was wrapped around the waist. The men also wear a headdress called potong or turban, while the women knotted their hair at the back of their heads. They usually wore a salakot or a wide brim hat when walking under the sun or rain. To further enhance their personal appearance, women adorned themselves with various types of jewelry, which is such as rings, earrings, bracelets, armlets, and the necklaces made of gold, silver, agates, pearls, beads, and other precious stones. And there is a book called the Boxer Codex. And in that book is a documentary of how ancient Filipinos were dressed. Even pictures were there, drawn by European who who civilized us, who conquered the Philippines before. And here's the first example. A Binukot lady from the Cagayan Valley, possibly Ilocano. Second is the Highland Igorot warrior from Cagayan Valley or Cordillera Highlands, possibly Ibanag. And a couple with tied long hair and kapilan hailed from Tamay Anchorage, Lingayen, Gulf, Luzon, Philippines, possibly Pangasinense or Ilocano from Old Cabalor State in Pangasinan that fell merely 14 years ago from when this was first illustrated. And then these are Zambal, Zambal hunters from Zambales, featured in these both photos. Next, the example again is a couple belonging to the Zambal warrior hunter class. The image shows sculpture of Facultrine, and below that is Aita or Negreto hunters. And these three are Tagalog royalty in red, the distinctive color of his class with his wife. Tagalog royal couple in red, the distinct color of their class. Tagalog Maginoo, noble class, wearing blue, the distinctive color of his class with his wife. More more pictures here is the native common women wearing simple clothes and headscarves like Muslims from Maynila in 1500s. A native Binukot lady, possibly Visayan Kadatuan, royal couple, and Visayan Kadatuan royal with his wife wearing red, the distinctive color of their class. Now let's proceed to the last pictures of Asian Filipinos in the Boxer Codex. There's a Pintados, Cebuano or Waray couple of the Timao Marshal Friedel class, later demoted to freedman status, and Pindados, again from Bohol, showing their patok or tattoos, and the native Visayan Uripon or slaves. There are many pictures in the Boxer Codex, but these are the pictures of our ancient Filipinos. In the Boxer Codex, they also um, appeared the ones who were doing uh, doing exchange or barter from Chinese people to Thailand people and many more. And now let's proceed to the Visayans tattooed bodies or fair skin while in Zambales. Well, the Visayans had tattooed bodies or fair skin while in Zambales. They were darker and had hairstyle that involved shaving the forehead and front half of the head but retaining loose long hair at the back. Even the class system practiced by the ethnic groups were portrayed in the codex. The social ranking was distinct from one place to another. Clothing or lack of it discreetly distinguished the differences. Another thing that you would notice while looking at the illustrations is the abundance of gold jewelry worn by the Filipinos. The Spaniards were obsessed with gold. In their belief that the islands were full of gold, they willingly exchanged Brazil for the Philippines in one of their treaties with Portugal. Now, the tattooing of designs in ancient Filipinos. Symbolism is part and parcel of pre-colonial Filipino warrior culture. A certain clothing, tattoo, or cicatrix may connote the warrior's status in the warrior society. Tattooing was widely practiced in pre-colonial Philippines, but for the purpose of ornamentation and rite of passage, this was particularly known in Visayas and among the highlands of northern Luzon. So widespread was the practice of tattooing in the Visayas that the Spaniards coined the Visayans pintados, painted, because their bodies were covered with tattoos. Batok is the general term for tattoos in the Visayas. These tattoos have symbolic meanings that convey their bravery or triumphant in the bloodshed or even the numbers of heads they have cut off. In addition, tattoos are believed to possess special powers that protect and shield warrior during conflict. By contrast, Kalinga women are adorned with tattoos on their body to enhance their beauty, mark their coming of age, and boost fertility. The primary purpose of tattooing amongst the Ifugao, Kalinga, and Bontok ethnic groups are related to headhunting. Tattoos signify a man's transition from being recognized headhunter to fearsome warrior. So, there are many meanings of tattooing in Visayas. As I stated before, it particularly describes a man's victory in war, while in women, it represents their beauty. And not only that, where the possessing one tattoo indicates a person's successful headhunt expedition. More elaborate tattoos are given only to those who have killed more than 10 people. Thus, the more markings a warrior has, the more respect he commands. Now, let us go to the historical errors rectified by Jose Rizal on Antonio Morga's book called Suceso de las Islas Filipinas. Antonio Morga's book is all about the Philippines in pre-colonial times or before the Spaniards came into the Philippines. And in that book, Antonio stated that Philippines is not a developed country or maybe what you call poor or not in any way rich in culture or in any aspects. But Rizal annotate Antonio's book because Rizal has seen many errors and knows that there are misconceptions and misinterpretations of the pre-colonial past of the Philippines. Rizal's annotation of Morga's Suceso or Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. Rizal commits the error of many historians in appraising the events of the past in the light of present standard. Rizal attacks on the church were unfair and unjustified because the abuses of the friars should not be construed to mean the Catholicism is bad. In his historical essay, which includes the narration of Philippine colonial history, punctuated as it was with incidents of agony, tensions, strategies, prolonged periods of suffering that many of people had been subjected. He correctly observed that as a colony of Spain, the Philippines was depopulated, impoverished, and retarded, stunted by metamorphosis, with no confidence in her past, still without faith in her present, without faltering hope in the future. So, basically, Rizal is saying that when Spain colonized the Philippines, it was a hard time. It was a dark time. But before that, he's stating that the lives of Filipinos have been more peaceful and more simple than than when the Spain colonized the Philippines. The people of the Philippines had a culture on their own before the coming of Spaniards. Filipinos were decimated, demoralized, exploited, and ruined by the Spanish colonization. The present state of the Philippines was not necessarily superior to its past. Rizal went to say, little by little, they lost their old traditions, the mementos of their past. They gave up their writing, their songs, their poems, their laws in order to learn other doctrines which they did not understand, another morality, another aesthetics. different from those inspired by their climate and their manner of thinking. They decline degrading themselves in their own eyes. They become ashamed of what was their own. They began to admire and praise whatever was foreign, incomprehensible. Their spirit was damaged and surrendered. That was the statement given by Jose Rizal in his book that annotates Antonio Morga's book. Now, many by this said, many Spaniards historians were misinterpret and misconcept by this. And in Rizal's book, he established in his book Indolence of the Filipinos, translated in English. He stated many conceptions and misinterpretations of Spaniards towards Asian people. First, the establishment of Galilean trade cut off all previous associations with the Philippines with other countries in Asia and Middle East. As a result of this, business was only conducted with Spain through Mexico. Because of this, the small businesses and handicraft industries that flourished during the pre-Spanish period gradually disappeared. Second, Spain also extinguished the natives' love of work because of the implementation of forced labor. Because of the wars between Spain and other countries in Europe, as well as Muslims in Mindanao, the Filipinos were compelled to work in shipyards, roads, and other public works, abandoning agriculture, industry, and commerce. Third, Spain did not protect the people against foreign invaders and pirates. With no arms to defend themselves, the natives were killed, their houses burned, and their lands destroyed. As a result of this, the Filipinos were forced to become nomads, lost interest in cultivating their lands or in rebuilding industries that were shut down, and simply became submissive to the mercy of God. Fourth, there was a crooked system of education, if it was to be considered an education. What was being taught in the schools were repetitive prayers and other things that could not be used by students to lead country to progress. There were no courses in agriculture, industry, etc., which were badly needed by the Philippines during those times. Fifth, the Spanish rulers were a bad example to despise manual labor. The officials reported to work at noon and left early, all the while doing nothing in line with their duties. The women were seen constantly followed by servants who dressed them and fanned them, personal things which they ought to have done for themselves. These are the misconceptions and misinterpretations of Spaniards towards Asian Filipino by Jose Rizal's book Indolence of the Filipinos. Another thing that we might add that had caused this indolence is the lack of unity among the Filipino people. In the absence of unity and oneness, the people did not have the power to fight the hostile attacks of government and of the other forces of society. There will be also no voice, no leader to sow progress and to cultivate it, so that it may be reaped in due time. In such condition, the Philippines remained a country that was lifeless, dead, simply existing and not living. That was in Jose Rizal's book, Indolence of the Filipinos. That book is pertaining to what Spaniards did to the Filipino people when they colonized it. He's just stating that before the Spaniards came, Filipinos have a rich culture, a rich society, a rich land, and has its own development. Philippines can be developed as a country if the Spaniards didn't came and colonize it. And that was pretty uh, pretty true, because if you look at the Filipino history, we have many cultures, we have many we have a right system, we have a government which is in the old days called barangay, and that government is a pure example of equality. The social status is a pure example of of today, and in the social class or the status of sociality is equal to all, to women and to children. But in this day, that was misconcept and underrated. And I think Asian Filipinos has more better life than us today, because when you look at it, there are so many things that they have done and they have accomplished even without this modern technology. And if Spaniards didn't colonize it, I think we would be a country which is rich in culture, which is rich in agriculture activities, rich in society, and rich in beliefs that identify us as a Filipino. Thank you. That's all.